Come in, Southern California. This is Radio Free Los Angeles. Do you copy? Repeat, do you copy?
Now transmitting from behind the Iron Curtain in the People's Republic of California, we bring you the voice of free men, free markets, and limited constitutional government. Welcome to citizen-sponsored Radio Free Los Angeles with President of the California Taxpayers Union, Mike Alexander, and editor of the Taxpayer Gazette, Jonathan Wilson.
And a beautiful Sunday evening. Good evening to all of you. It's great to be with you again. This is Mike Alexander, Radio Free Los Angeles. I will be joined in a little while by Josh Jacobs. My good friend Jonathan Wilson is still back in South Carolina. Maybe he'll never come back. I'm not sure. But if he doesn't, he's missing some beautiful Southern California evenings. Hasn't the weather just been gorgeous? This is why we live here. This is why we have to work hard together to take our beautiful state back from the hands of those who would destroy it with excessive government, excessive social engineering, and above all, excessive taxation and spending. We're going to talk about a lot of those issues tonight, but one of the first issues that I want to bring to your attention, as you know, we've been working very hard on school choice. Up to this point, we've been School Choice 2020. It is a huge project, and we have been receiving enormous support from a lot of quarters. It has appeared, however, that getting this organized and pulling together all the money is going to take a little longer than we expected, but we must lay the foundation correctly. Accordingly, it is a consensus of the advisors and stakeholders and trusted people in this issue that school choice should move on to the 2022 ballot rather than have it sitting in there struggling for attention in the middle of a presidential race and so forth. So school choice initiative is now targeted for the November 2022 ballot. So from here on out, we're going to talk about School Choice 2022, but I think our website, at least for the time being, is schoolchoice2020.org. So I'd like you to go there and make sure that we know about you. It's going to take time to get this effort organized. It hardly seems that long ago that Donald Trump was running for president. So much has gone on. So much has happened here. It's easy to forget that 2.5 years have already passed, and we're now deep, deep into the presidential cycle. That's how fast these things come around. 2 years is not a lot of time in politics. We will need every moment, every day, every week, and most importantly, every dollar and every vote to pass this very important measure here in the state of California. So I wanted to get that announcement out of the way right away, and we will continue to talk more about it. School choice is not dead by any means. It is more alive than ever, more necessary than ever. I've got a couple of other important issues in my stack of things here that we're going to discuss tonight, and a particularly important article that was published by Govern for California. That's David Crane's website. I think it's governforcalifornia.org. But it was a beautiful open editorial that was written by George Shultz and David G. Crane. George Shultz, as you know, is Ronald Reagan's former Secretary of State, and I think he handled a number of other budgetary issues. He might even have been treasurer at one point. I don't recall. But this guy has got to be bucking 100. I know he's in his 90s. He served in World War II. In fact, he was a platoon leader or company commander in the Marine Corps during World War II. So this fellow is old. He'd been around it, but just as vigorous as ever, and he has some very important things to say about budgeting. Can't imagine anything more cold and unappetizing, and yet nothing could be more important because it deals with the most important issue in this state, and that is money, taxes, and spending. So we'll be talking about that. We also have a new councilman who just recently got elected, claims he's a Republican. John Lee won the runoff or special election is what I think it was in the North Valley of Los Angeles City. That's up there around Chatsworth and whatnot. Northridge includes a lot of very conservative people in this county, so he won it. But he tends to talk like a typical government liberal, so we'll see what actually comes of it. I didn't follow his campaign. I'd like to hear from anybody who listened to his campaign to see if he discussed pensions or anything else. We're also going to talk about a recent article that just hit. And as you know, one of our passions here is local government and helping everybody to try to understand just what is done in their name. And the city of Los Angeles, despite all the problems that they have just come up with another boondoggle secret settlement, secret deals with the unions that have boosted their compensation 15% over the next 3 years. I'll go into those details as well. It is absolutely outrageous. And finally, we will discuss another opinion piece produced by my good friend John Kupal of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, who rejects the idea that the schools need more money in California and covers just exactly how much they have here in this state and why their continuous demands for more and more money is just, as we like to say here, another fraud, another hustle, another con of the taxpayer. So, as you know, we've talked about all these issues. We've talked about pension deficits and so forth. Let's start with the city of Los Angeles so that we can work with an actual example here, some real data dealing with real numbers. So in the city of Los Angeles here, just this past week, they passed unanimously, with almost no discussion in the city council itself, a brand new contract. Now, those contracts are going to cost $282 million over a 3-year period from July 1st, 2018, when the old contract expired, to June 30th, 2021. It isn't really a long-term contract, just short-term, really. And it deals with only about 20,000 of the city's employees. I don't know how many they have, but it's quite a few. But they entered into the contract with the various unions that represent the so-called civilian, that is non-uniformed city employees. This $282 million represents a generous increase of 15% over the next 3 years, significantly higher than the projected growth in general fund revenues. Let me translate that. They are spending more than they expect to have come in. And when you do that, and they always do it, that means that they're going to have to raise taxes. So this is nothing more than a tax bill, and they're going to say, well, we're going broke. We can't pay our bills. We have to have more revenue. It's the classic cycle. The amount does not include $8 million from the elimination of the 10% employee contribution towards health care. So in other words, that is the form of an increase there. The employees no longer have to make that increase. That means the city will have to pick up that entire bill. In addition, this $282 million does not take account, or that number does not include, the settlement of an outstanding grievance for $15 million. And, of course, as always, it does not include the increased pension contributions, which are estimated in the range of $40 million over the next 2 years. Now, it's a little bit unclear to me whether they're talking about the pension increases that are going to be required by this settlement that is triggered by the $282 million and other amounts, or whether this $40 million is just additional revenue that is going to have to be paid by the city as ordered by their own pension plans. Overall, this would push the increase to $345 million, a whopping 18% increase over the current salary level. Now, you wonder why our cities are going broke. Hey, it looks like Josh just got in here. I forgot to give you the telephone number. If you'd like to weigh in on any of these things, we'd love to hear from you. Josh is underemployed right now. You can reach us at 866-870-5752. That's right here at Radio Free Los Angeles at AM 870 here, KRLA, The Answer. So we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to go back and start beating up the city of Los Angeles again. So overall, here, over the next 3 years, we're going to have a 18 to 20% increase in overall salary and compensation levels, and all of this happened with minimum discussion. Now, the author of this particular article that I really want to credit here, I should have mentioned the person's name sooner. It is, our old friend Jack Humphreyville, 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 who is one of the best-known gadabouts and nuisances in the news reporting business, and I say that with admiration and compliments. He has been out there for years on these issues. Nobody tracks the city of Los Angeles harder or more critically than he does. In any event, his concluding paragraph is fairly simple. The cover-up of the economics of the new labor contracts is why we cannot trust Garcetti, Wesson, and the rest of the city council. It is why there should be open and transparent labor negotiations, not behind closed doors, and why we need and deserve an Office of Transparency and Accountability. Jack Humphreyville writes for LA Watchdog for City Watch. We ought to get Jack on here sometime, have him in if he'll come in and talk about City of Los Angeles issues there, Josh. He'd be a fabulous guest.
He's very good. He is at Jack90020 on Twitter if you want to follow him there. Mm-hmm. And he's been covering stuff for years, talking about the corruption that's been happening at City Hall. Unfortunately, it's gotten worse. And,
yes.
It's funny because we criticized Mayor Villaraigosa 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, Garcetti makes Villaraigosa look great.
Yeah. They're all the same people. They all do the same thing. Now, how do all these numbers translate? So we mentioned a couple of LA issues. They're out there increasing the compensation for their current employees. At the same time, they've elected a new replacement city councilman, a guy named Lee, out there in the North Valley. Okay, fine and dandy. I wonder if anybody talked about these facts, or if these facts even came up in the labor negotiations, much less the campaign. I refer all of you to pensiontracker.org. Pension, just like it sounds, tracker, standard spelling, TRACKER.org. This excellent website is run by our friend Joe Nation, who is a professor up there at Stanford, and this guy does extraordinary work in calculating the actual pension obligations. And there's a reason I'm going into this here. So I know some of this is hard, but let's take what they call the actuarial value of the pensions. How much does their own pension system, using their own investment assumptions, because Los Angeles City runs its own pensions. It's not part of CalPERS. But in the reports that it files with the state, it reports that they have a liability of about $51.5 billion. That's through the year 2017.
Holy smokes.
That's $51 billion, right? And they say, that they claim to be 88.3% funded, right? Only a little bit behind, which means that they claim that their actuarial debt is $6 billion. Well, even if it's $6 billion, they've got no business paying their employees more, because it's obvious they haven't paid the employees what they owe them. What is a pension debt? If you haven't set aside the amount of money that you're supposed to pay somebody's pension, that's money that you owe him. You've stolen from that employee. You've stolen. Now, while you owe him money, why are you paying him more up front when you're going to owe him more on the backside? Everybody needs to tighten that belt and say, look, there simply isn't any more money. But that, of course, is not how the scam works. Now, let's go to the real numbers. Those numbers that I just read you, the numbers that they report, those are based upon their own internal assumptions about what their investments are going to generate. And typically, they estimate about 7% compounded over the next 20 or 30 years. And that's how they come up with only, quote unquote, being $6 billion behind.
Speculators, basically.
Yes. Well, we all know. I mean, anybody who's paying attention, true, false, or otherwise, you've seen all the attention paid to negative bond returns, negative interest rates in some parts of this world. Well, at any rate, if you take a more realistic return, which would be somewhere around 3 to 4%, compounded over the next 20 or 30 years, you come up with a very different set of numbers for the city of Los Angeles. Now, if you live in the city of Los Angeles, man, hold on to your chair, because here's what the real numbers, what they actually owe their employees, over the lifetime of their pensions that have vested thus far. What they actually owe them is more like $87 billion rather than $51 billion, if you really calculate it. That's what the market tells us that number is going to be. And the value of the assets that they have on hand is right now only about $45 billion that they have, current market value. That leaves a pension debt that is underfunded, money they have failed to pay their employees that they're going to have to come up with someday, of $41.6 billion. This was just through the end of fiscal 2017. Can you imagine what it is now and what it's going to be in the future? And they're hiring more of these people, hiring more of them. So, for all of you who live in Los Angeles, you're going to have to get very active or find some new place to live, because Los Angeles, which is already expensive, is going to get even more expensive and more crowded and worse managed, and these services are going to go down. That is the fact. So you can bet that those numbers didn't come up in the public discussions. Now, we've got a few minutes more to go. If you'd like to comment or make a contribution, add to this discussion, the number here at Radio Free Los Angeles is 866-870-5752. I see a hand raised at the back of the classroom.
I like being at the back of the classroom. Yes. It's kind of fun this way.
Yeah, the slow kid's got his hand up. All right.
Well, it seems like the higher our taxes, the fewer services there are when it comes to stuff like this.
Well, that's exactly what happens.
The higher the gasoline taxes, the crummier our roads. We got the highest gasoline taxes in the country, yet we still have the second crummiest roads in the country. Mm-hmm. So it just, the more they spend, the worse it gets.
Well, this when we go into the second half hour, I'm going to take up George Shultz's, former Secretary of State George Shultz, and he was also very high up with Bechtel Corporation. This guy is a varsity player, if ever there was one. But in any event, just what you raised there, that issue that you mentioned, Josh, brings to mind, the story here that was the article that's published by John Kupal. John Kupal, as I mentioned before, as many of you know, is the president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And he published an article. Let's see, where was it here? One of our local ones, articles here for the state of California.
Yeah, HJTA is is the site for the Howard Jarvis taxpayers, but also he does stuff in the Orange County Register, was it?
Yeah, actually it was a press enterprise. Found Riverside, which has its moments as a newspaper out there. Well, in any event, John Kupal raises the logical question. are California schools really starving for revenue, quote unquote? They're always jonesing for more money, but as he points out, as we all know and discuss here frequently, Proposition 98, which was passed in the back, I think, in 2006, guaranteed that to be 40% of the California's general fund would have to go to education, K through 14. Well, now all of a sudden it's not, and it's a big problem, and they're whining as usual. But what do we know? First of all, California, John points out, has the nation's highest income tax. It also has the highest state sales tax. It has the highest gas tax and the highest vehicle taxes in America. And surely, he points out, we should be able to fund education, one of government's most important functions, at an adequate level. Now, the other point that he makes, well, how about our property taxes? Prop 13. You know, these guys respond reflexively and like an injured parrot. You know,
the Prop 13 excuse.
Prop 13. Second, as John points out, don't tell us that property taxes are inadequate and that Proposition 13 is to blame. California actually ranks 17th out of 50 states in per capita property tax collections, and that doesn't even include the billions of dollars generated for schools by additional parcel taxes imposed at the local level. Moreover, speaking of Proposition 13, we are now spending 30% more on a per-student inflation-adjusted basis than we were in the mid-'70s, just before the passage of Proposition 13, a time when all agreed the schools were top-notch. Clearly, the current ills of California's education system have nothing to do with inadequate property tax dollars. There's really no question about that. The other one, the point that John makes, and we need to bear this in mind as we discuss schools and as we come back to the overall fiscal issues that are the number one concern here in our state. John points out the notion that California ranks low in per-pupil spending relative to other states does not hold up to serious scrutiny. Those statistics don't include many of the sources of revenue, such as parcel taxes, bond proceeds, building schools is, in fact, of course, education spending, and state bailouts of CalSTRS, the state teacher retirement system. The simple fact is that California is above average in per-pupil spending according to the U.S. Census. The real problem, of course, is that the political establishment, as John points out, is completely unwilling to address any of the fundamental problems of the school system, including expanded school choice, merit pay for teachers, pension reforms, elimination or modification of tenure, and limiting administrative overhead. Not all those comments were John's. I mixed them in there a little bit, but I recommend John Kupala and the work of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association to anyone and everyone. That music that you hear means that we're at the end of the first half hour. Our lines are wide open at 866-870-5752. Join us to be part of it. I'll be back after the break with Josh Jacobs to continue our discussion.
Southern California. This is Radio Free Los Angeles. Do you copy? Repeat, do you copy?
Now transmitting from behind the Iron Curtain in the People's Republic of California, we bring you the voice of free men, free markets, and limited constitutional government. Welcome to citizen-sponsored Radio Free Los Angeles with President of the California Taxpayers Union, Mike Alexander, and editor of the Taxpayer Gazette, Jonathan Wilson.
Back with you after the break. Here, Mike Alexander, Radio Free Los Angeles. I now have Josh Jacobs with me. A refugee has returned from Culver City here, where he has other work on these wonderful Sunday evenings. The telephone number here for you to call is 866-870-5752. The lines are wide open. We'd love to hear from you on these very important issues. Even though it's summer, the bills keep going on, and we have to stay on top of them. I see the bills, not just our bills here at Radio Free Los Angeles, but the bills that are paying with the city, these pensions, these terrible tax debts that we have run up. They're absolutely out of control. And speaking of bills and our bills here, we hope that you will help support our efforts. You can go to radiofreelosangeles.net, all spelled out, all lowercase, radiofreelosangeles.net, and also schoolchoice2020.org. Please go there and support us. Let the opposition know that you support freedom in education. Let them know that you support families in their quest for a better life for themselves and for their children. Let them know that you support the United States of America and people's right to associate freely with each other without government interference, without us being taxed to death and then told by a bunch of bureaucrats what you're going to learn about life, and the complete usurpation of your role as parents or as grandparents. It's time for freedom in education. This is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. We don't want to miss it. It starts right here in California, and like everything else, it starts with you. Starts with me. It starts with personal responsibility, and none of these bureaucrats is going to do the right thing. You're going to struggle to find a politician who will do the right thing, and of course that's no Democrats, and darn few Republicans will step up to support this because they are deathly afraid of public school and public employee unions walking the precincts against them and bagging on them. You won't find a city councilman to go along with it. We may find a few, but by golly, we don't see many here and there. But if we create some momentum out here together and we make the case for personal freedom and for educational excellence and for moral formation under the guidance of parents and of families, then they will see that a movement has begun. Maybe they will be less cowardly and willing to come forward and support this very important issue. Remember, the civil rights movement that resulted in legal equality for so many black citizens and other citizens of color. This campaign was not popular. The release from slavery following during the Civil War was not popular in the South. It was not popular a lot of places. And blacks continued to be second-class citizens in many places in this country, and there had to be a civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s and for many years thereafter in order to secure the rights of black citizens and others of other minority groups under the law. Well, that's what we're going to have to do with schools. And I'll tell you what, when you finish looking at the numbers that affect the schools, it'll become clear to you, as it is to me, that you need to get the hell out of the public school system. It's broke. That money's not going to be there. It's time for the parents to take that money, and all those people with those pensions are going to have to make do with the money that they have. They're just going to have to do it. Now, Josh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say something. Think about this. All these politicians have children, right? A lot of them do. And
Yes.
especially these leftist politicians. The vast
Unfortunately,
majority,
some of them do reproduce.
yeah, the vast majority of their kids go to these upscale private schools. They don't go to public schools. So ask yourself, if public schools are so great, how come these leftist politicians who claim to support public schools, who are oppose school choice, send their own children to these upscale private schools that cost megabucks?
Right. Number one, they have the money to do so privately. Number two, we know, and of course, your question was rhetorical. I know that you know the answer, and we also learned that up to a third or even more of all public school teachers send their own children to private school and usually parochial school of some kind, so that they get some moral formation at the same time. And when you get into the worst of the districts, the number of teachers who send their children to private schools soars. Yeah, you don't have anybody sending. Well, obviously, I exaggerate, but you get into the Los Angeles Unified School District, anybody has a way out gets out. Now, the theme of the show thus far has been fiscal, which affects everything that we do here in this state. It affects our federal government. It affects our ability to fight off China and fight off Russia. It affects our ability to fight off the invasion that we have at the southern border. But above all, here in the state of California, it affects our ability to maintain basic services like fire and police, and these bills are coming due. And at the bottom of this whole business is accounting standards. One of the fights that I've had with candidates for office in a number of cities here in the San Gabriel Valley has been my one single thing. I said, look, you can do whatever you want, but one of the first things that you need to do is to go into your city and make the accountants restate your obligations accurately so that we actually know what those obligations are. They refuse to do it, and when they're confronted with it, the accountants will say, well, look, we comply with generally accepted bookkeeping standards and so forth for government. So George Shultz and David Crane wrote an article that was published, I believe, in the San Francisco Chronicle about these issues. So I'm going to read it because I'll try to edit it here and there. But this article is really worth hearing and understanding, because if you don't understand these things, then you don't understand the criminal enterprise that we call government. So the title of the article is, "It's Time for Truth in State and Local Government Finances. These people ought to be on my show," by George P. Shultz and David G. Crane. Imagine your business could treat borrowings as revenues, avoid cost recognition by not paying expenses, and report less debt than actually owed. Fortunately, accounting for private sector enterprises doesn't enable such activities, but accounting for state and local governments does, and with big consequences. The Financial Accounting Standard Board, FASB, sometimes called FASB, FASB, which governs financial reporting by private sector enterprises, requires accrual accounting and truthful reporting of liabilities. In other words, if you have money coming in or debts, you've got to put it on your books right now. And if you don't, your banker will have your head. Those were my comments. Back on the record here. Under FASB, borrowings aren't revenues. Costs must be accrued whether or not paid. Revenues are recognized as earned, and retirement liabilities can't be understated. But the Government Accounting Standards Bureau, GASB, otherwise known as GASB, which governs financial reporting by state and local governments, doesn't impose accrual accounting and permits aggressive assumptions for valuing retirement obligations. Sound familiar? As a result, state and local officials aren't prevented from reporting balanced budgets and sometimes even surpluses that under FASB, that is normal accounting standards, and common sense would be neither. For example, Chicago used proceeds from the sale of 75 years of parking meter revenues to plug a single year's budget shortfall. Last year, California's budget ignored more than half of the actuarial costs of insurance subsidies provided to retired state employees, adding to $85 billion of liabilities already accumulated from non-recognition of such previous costs. And pension costs that today are crowding out state and local services all across the country would have been identified more than a decade ago as addressable threats to government budgets, but for GASB rules permitting public pension funds to underreport the real size of pension promises. Those are huge words. You've heard them here before. It's good to hear them from these people. Today, state and local governments are using GASB's permissive rules to report unfunded pension liabilities at just 1/4, 25% of the $4 trillion. The same liabilities are valued by the Federal Reserve's financial accounts of the United States. Let me go back to this is me speaking here now. What they're saying here is that because of the GASB, the generally accepted accounting rules here that the states and counties and cities use, these are used across the country, and as a result, pension liabilities are underestimated by at least 75%, and I'll bet you it's more than that because I don't think that the Federal Reserve uses our standards, but you got the idea. Budgets enabled by GASB's permissiveness can produce painful consequences. For example, despite record tax revenues and a 30% income tax increase, the school district serving Sacramento is laying off teachers because money is being diverted to past retirement promises whose true size and underfunded nature has been hidden by GASB's permissive rules. Under private sector rules, those costs would have been made visible when incurred in time to act on them and well before they started crushing classroom budgets. Now, the reason, this is me talking again, George doesn't tell you this, but the reason they didn't is because if they put that number on their budget, on their balance sheet, then they couldn't be passing out salary increases. They couldn't be engaged in a spending fest. They would have to admit that from now on our cities are being primarily run for the benefit of government pensions, payments to pay former employees for services already rendered, and current services are going to come down. Now, back on the record here. The key to reforming GASB, that is government accounting standards, lies in its chair, who is the only full-time GASB board member. At FASB, Private Sector Accounting Board, all board members serve full-time and are required to sever connections with firms or institutions they served before joining FASB. But GASB board members, other than the chair, are part-time and may be employed by other organizations, including state and local governments. That is, you have people sitting on the government accounting standards board who are supervised and controlled by the same board. The same people are running deficits are setting the standards for reporting those deficits and debts. It's incestuous. As a result, at GASB, it has been much easier for the regulated to control their regulator. but that can change if GASB's next chair is a reformer and independent of state and local governments. GASB's chair is selected by the 18 trustees of the not-for-profit Financial Accounting Foundation. Charles Noski is the chairman and Diane Rubin is the vice chair. I'm going to skip a few parts there. Some state and local governments will resist such a voice, but just as private sector firms are not given a veto over their own accounting officials who regulate their accounting, neither should state and local governments. The federal government has a strong interest in GASB, that is, Government Accounting Standards Board, requiring state and local governments to account truthfully for their financial activities because states provide the lion's share of domestic services, including public education, public safety, and infrastructure. The next recession will expose those state and local governments that have used GASB's permissive rules to cover up deep financial problems, potentially forcing the federal government to step in and finance core public services. All that would be, this is me talking, all that would be, George, would be a massive underwriting, a subsidy to government employees at the rest of at everybody else's expense, and these massive California pensions would then be paid by national taxpayers. George, I think, and David, I think we should recognize that bailout will not happen. It sure as hell won't happen in a Trump administration because he's made California and other big government states his whipping boy, and I happen to agree with him. State and local governments spend more than $3 trillion per year. I actually calculate over 4, as you know. Compensate nearly 20 million public employees and provide the vast majority of domestic government services to more than 325 million Americans. GASB's rules permit state and local government financial statements to bury facts that eventually produce devastating consequences for critical public services and taxpayers. FAF, that's the foundation that appoints the head of GASB. FAF trustees should select a reform-minded GASB chair who is independent of state and local governments. Here's George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State, Labor, and Treasury, a distinguished fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and author of Thinking About the Future. David G. Crane is a lecturer in public policy at Stanford University and president of Govern for California. And I recommend governforcalifornia.org. It's a great website. Now, I hope that I didn't bore anybody out there, but this is hard stuff. You need to hear it. Everything that we've been talking about on this program and politically in the California Taxpayers Union and the Tea Party and everything else and school choice 2020.org, everything that we're talking about has been repeated and accredited here in this article. So anytime that we have George Shultz agreeing with Radio Free Los Angeles and Radio Free Los Angeles agreeing with David Crane and Govern for California and George Shultz, we have agreement. We are not wrong here, folks, and we have a major crisis. Now, I'm going to go further than George. I'm going to say that the problem is a lot worse than Secretary Shultz has put forth. I mean, it's a limited article. You can't put everything in there, but it is my personal belief, after having looked at so many of these pension obligations, is that given the poor financial reporting that characterizes state and local governments and counties, that most of the cities in this state and certainly in this county are insolvent just because of those pension obligations, and we should be moving now at the state level to reform these things. I know that the Supreme Court has been dealing with these issues, onesies, twosies here, but we're going to have to get out of the California rule or just put the whole darn thing into bankruptcy. Each of these cities may have to go into an insolvency proceeding and actually get rid of those obligations. But before we do that, we're going to need to make sure that the citizens are actually independently represented. Because what happens is that when these cities go into bankruptcy, the same people who produce the insolvency, who failed to report these issues, failed to deal with them, are now collectively the debtor in reorganization, and they get a say. And so these people are politicians, and they're busy behaving based upon their own electoral interests and carrying out whatever it is that they want to see happen, and end up approving plans in bankruptcy that don't really solve the problems. We saw that in Vallejo. We saw that in city of San Bernardino. Did the same thing. The creditors took a haircut. The bondholders got screwed, and the public employees basically continued as before. So bankruptcy is not in and of itself a solution, but at some point we're going to have to recognize that the tax revenue can't catch up. If I had to make a guess, I would say that what's going to happen is that is nothing, and that the situation would just gradually deteriorate. And George here is projecting that maybe the federal government will have to come in to bail these systems out. I bail out what? We read every night. Not every night, but every Sunday night here on this program, we have the Government Grifter of the Week award. We point out the compensation, and we point out the pension benefits that are based upon that compensation, and we do it for a reason. We do it to illustrate just what it is that the federal government, that is the federal taxpayer in South Dakota, Montana, Kansas, Wyoming, New Mexico, is going to be asked to do and pay for California employees. It's ridiculous. You know, we have cops that are making more than the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Why? Why do we have to pay that kind of money? It's absolutely ridiculous. So I heartily praise and recommend this article here. It's A Time for Truth in State and Local Government Finances by George P. Schultz and David Crane. I think it appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle, but if not, you can see a copy of it probably at Govern for California. So we're coming up on the 9 o'clock hour. Here. The lines are wide open at 866-870-5752. I hope the summer isn't dragging on. I haven't put you too far to sleep, but this is it. Believe me, they count on you getting bored. They count on you not paying attention. They count on nobody having a program like this that focuses on it. So when we come back after the news here, we will have more stories on local issues, and at the end of before the 9:30 break, we will have our ever-popular Government Grifter of the Week award. This is Mike Alexander, Josh Jacobs, Radio Free Los Angeles, back with you after the break.
Southern California. This is Radio Free Los Angeles. Do you copy? Repeat, do you copy?
Now transmitting from behind the Iron Curtain in the People's Republic of California, we bring you the voice of free men, free markets, and limited constitutional government. Welcome to citizen-sponsored Radio Free Los Angeles with President of the California Taxpayers Union, Mike Alexander, and Editor of the Taxpayer Gazette, Jonathan Wilson.
And we are live here. Mike Alexander. No Jonathan Wilson, still in South Carolina, but I do have Josh Jacobs. Welcome back this evening,
Thank
Josh.
you, Mike.
And also, I want to take just a few moments to thank my good friend Basil Hoffman, who has recorded the promo and the intro and whatnot. A star of stage, screen, and television and whatnot. Just a wonderful actor.
He is, yeah.
Wonderful conservative and good friend. So thank you, Basil, wherever you are, whatever set you're working on, whatever location you are at. Thank you again for doing this.
He had some great stories about his adventures in Hollywood and how Red Fox gave him a really big break by making him a guest star on Sanford & Son back in the 1970s. So that was really cool to hear the story there.
I love Red Fox.
He was great.
Oh, he was a funny guy. A couple of the funnier things that he said, I simply can't repeat.
I know, me neither.
on radio, it's just amazing.
All I can mention is Fred's concoctions with Ripple.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, Ripple. Yeah, that's
beer and Ripple. We call it Bripple.
Ripple, yeah, Ripple, and a little T-Bird that is Thunderbird. Yeah, that's people don't often realize just how much money Gallo made. And I think continues to make with fortified wines. We used to call them winos, right? For a reason. They could get that extra alcohol. It was cheaper than beer. Cheaper than booze and more alcohol than beer. But, we, once again, our telephone number here is area code 866-870-5752. Hope that you'll call in. Our lines are wide open. We haven't had any callers this evening. I think we're in the dog days of August, the last couple of weeks. People are out. Either that or I just bored you to death. If you got bored to death, you still have any breath, call me and said, hey, look, it's boring. But I'm not here to pursue a radio career. I already have one of those. I'm not here to do things in politics. We're already involved in politics. Don't need it for that purpose. I have a wonderful business, and I enjoy my Sunday evenings. But I also enjoy being with you. I think it's important that we're with you here on Sunday night, so we talk to you about the things that nobody else talks to you about. But you can see just by what George Shultz had to say, he thought it was important enough to work with another guy to get something out there. Very, very important. And Josh, I think you're going to post this article, the George Shultz, David Crane article. You're going to post it up on our Facebook?
Yeah, we got a Radio Free LA Facebook page, and
yes.
What we're going to do is I'm going to get the address from you, and then we'll post it up
All
there
right.
as soon as we can.
Good.
I don't have the access to it. I think Jonathan does, so we'll make sure to have him post that.
Good. We need to do it. Government is failing all around us. And another article that just came out here over the weekend that Josh was kind enough to research is another kind of typical article that we see all the time from government, and that is the collapse of the recycling effort. This has been at the heart of so many government schemes that we've forgotten about it. When we go to the store, we buy a six-pack of anything, whether it's soda or beer, whatnot. You have not only the sales tax on it, which is, of course, high, 10% plus, 10.75 in most places, but you also have the CRT, California
redemption value, basically it's about 5 cents usually for a small bottle, and then 10 cents for a larger bottle.
So the idea is that the government will collect it. It's not really a tax,
Yeah, exactly.
It's not really a tax, but that money will then be paid to others, used by the state to process recycling. So over the years, scores of businesses, hundreds of businesses throughout the state of California went into the recycling business. Some of them became highly favored by the state of California, and one of these businesses here was one of these operations that maintain the recycling centers at grocery stores. Mm-hmm. So if you've gone to your grocery store like I have, you have to dodge homeless and grocery carts and every other darn thing in lines of bums and students and who knows who the hell else back there at one of these sea freight containers, processing plastic bottles and aluminum cans. Well, I noticed here, and I finally got an explanation here, I noticed here that several months ago that operation was gone out of the Ralph's parking lot at one of their stores in Pasadena. Mm-hmm. So I said, what the hell happened? I mean, was this a zoning change? Well, it turns out that, and this was an article in CalMatters.org, 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 that Josh sent to me here. The largest recycler operating from supermarket parking lots in California, Replanet, they call R-E capital Planet, closed operations this month despite receiving $25 million in payments from the state in 2018. They had hundreds of these things. They shuttered hundreds of centers this month.
Sounds like crony socialism.
Well, I'm not sure. You're laying off 750 employees. It went under despite receiving the $25 million. This closure of Ontario-based Replanet LLC underscored and exacerbated California's recycling crisis, which threatens a pillar of the state's environmental data. Well, the fact is that the state of California mandated all of this recycling, prohibited people from just throwing the stuff away, and tried to impose a tax that they can get in between the consumer and the recycler, and I'm not surprised, really. $25 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're running one of these operations, it can't be. And if they were making money, they would have kept it going because it was state subsidized. So,
what's interesting about the whole recycling situation is that now we found out those paper straws that they just introduced to a bunch of places are not recyclable. Plastic straws are. This whole recycling thing is turning out to be a big scam, and some people are saying it's better just putting it into the garbage dump than it is recycling. In Sweden, they actually have a way of getting rid of trash by burning it in an incinerator, and they said that's actually more environmentally sound than the recycling efforts of plastics and other things here in America.
Yeah, anytime government gets involved in the marketplace, it distorts the marketplace, and by imposing all kinds of rules or limiting limits on revenues or whatever. So this whole thing is a disaster, but the money will still be paid by you and me. It'll be accumulated as a tax. God knows what they're going to do with it next. Well, it looks like they woke up out there in Radio Land. On line one, we have Dave from Orange County. How are you, Dave?
Hey, Mike. Happy week.
Hey, happy week to you.
Well, I just really want to offer some suggestions. This budget, I'm so glad you mentioned the LA budget debacle because, Mike, I'd like to offer some strategy points, and I really appreciate your schoolchoice2020.org. I'm thinking of ways that I can promote that for you. If I can't offer financial at times, but I thought of some ways I can help you with that. Promoting the link and doing flyers for you, even signed for you. I know the limits on independent expenditures. I know how that works. So there is some freedom there on my independent aspect and the way I want to help you with that. But here's some things, Mike. here's some strategy points. First of all, the great communicator Ronald Reagan. It's from him. If you can't, I've got several others real quick. First one is from Ronald Reagan. If you can't make them see the light, make them feel
the heat.
Okay. Number
yes.
2. Oh, awesome. David Horowitz, author of his great book, Radical Son. Folks, get that book. It's great. Here's what he says on his website, okay? He has a section on there on the art of political warfare, and here are his 2 main points. He says, define your enemy, number 1, and then number 2, devise ways to defeat him, okay? And here's number 3, folks, coalition building. This is how freedom works, organized via that big Washington rally out there in 2010. This is how they did, and that's how we turned the House. Coalition building, folks. Get your groups and help Mike with this, his program, and the recall of Newsom.
Yeah, I mean, anything we can do to these people, I think overall we've got 2 tasks, or at least 2 tasks that I said for myself here in this program, and that is to identify the reality that we call government as being as run. George is too nice a guy to say this, but as it is operated, it borders on, if not actually constitutes, a criminal enterprise. I don't know how you could possibly run a $42 billion pension negative in the city of Los Angeles and call it anything else and fail to identify it on your balance sheet. That is exactly what is required of any other businessman. And if they were to find anybody making declarations to them in the city who are required to prepare financial reports and supported bids or whatever, if they hid any of those things, the city would be out there putting them in jail. But they don't put themselves in jail because everybody is in on the con. Now, once we know what's going on out there, and what is being done in our name, particularly in the schools, then we set ourselves a strategy which deals with the most problems in the most effective way. And the advantage of school choice is that it deals with the crisis in education.
Yes, and I would say reach the common person.
You have to excuse
all
me.
ethnicities, the common man, the common family. Reach messaging to them. The mailers, cheap flyers. You know, reach the families who have kids in schools, and then
yes.
I've got a slogan I came up with, and you know, Ronald Reagan in one of the speeches mentioned in the Democrats' ways. You know, he used the figure of manure. Well, I've got one for you guys, and I've been getting it out there to the recall folks all over the place. I got 1,000 views in just like a day. Mm-hmm. It's this. Here it is. The California Democrat Party. A sewer runs through it.
Okay. Yeah, or no sewer. Yeah, we're trying to get Democrats in San Francisco and Los Angeles to use the sewer. Yeah, so no, but yeah, I give you. Let me go back. I've just got a minute or two. In terms of messaging, the other reason that we want to use school choice is because it does so much in so many other ways and represents a positive agenda for those of us who are conservative. It represents our vision, not only our political vision, Dave, but a vision of prosperity and success for everyone in this state, regardless of their political party, regardless of whether they're liberal or conservative, regardless of whether they're even legal or not.
So they can be ready economically when they leave home.
That's
They've got to
correct.
be prepared with that proper education.
That's right.
And a preacher once told me back after I became a Christian back in '81. He said the number one job of a parent is to make sure that their children are ready to be economically independent when they leave home.
Yeah. Well, I might have thought that the preacher would say that the number one job of a parent is to get his child to heaven.
Absolutely. But he was talking in practical terms.
In practical terms, absolutely. Yeah. No, I was just being a little wry. I, of course, knew what the Reverend was getting at, and he's entirely right, because faith and reason go along. And a big part of reason consists of education, knowledge of what the world is. So it has always been part of the Western, the tradition of Western civilization and Western Judeo-Christian tradition that faith is amplified by education and that learning more.
Proverbs says, get knowledge.
That's right. That's right. Hey, David, I want to thank you for your very constructive comments. We've got one of your favorite features coming up, Government Grifter of the Week Award here. And so we're going to go on to Juan Tierra. I want to thank you. Be sure to call the office there and leave me your number so we can be in touch about ways to work together. That number is 626-792-1772. Thank you. And now, when we bring up, go ahead.
And now, it's time for the weekly Government Grifter Award. And here he is, Le Mesure Juan Tierra.
How are you this evening, Juan?
Just fine, Mike.
All right, good.
Blast off.
All right, great. Are you through with all your grandparental obligations?
Yeah, I am, for a week at least.
I know. Well, I'm getting over one of my obligations. That little germbag, one of them, Luke, he went back to his owners back there in Virginia. But boy, he left some bugs behind for me. Oh, man. So anyway, I got to go back there and chase him down. So
okay.
what do you have for us this evening?
Well, it's August. It's hot. And hot summer weather drives people to our beaches. This fact led your insightful research to wonder about lifeguards, those guardians of safety at L.A. County beaches.
Oh, yes.
And they're part of the L.A. County Fire Department. That's all fine and dandy. As per Wikipedia, this year there are 177 full-time and 650 seasonal lifeguards. By the way, it's the largest professional lifeguard association in the world.
Wow.
L.A. County, yes, sir. Now, it's a responsible job, to be sure, with demanding physical requirements, but there are perks, since the job often consists of watching scantily clad beachgoers from towers.
Right.
But lest you think it's only tan males oogling girls' bikinis, not so. Over 130 of the lifeguards are actually females.
Oh, okay.
I think I'll stop this line of questioning right here.
I know, man.
Moving right along.
Hey-oh.
Being a lifeguard can also be financially rewarding. From a California Policy Center article in 2016, 93 lifeguards with their pay and benefits averaged $148,000 a year.
Really?
Another 128 with benefits earned over $100,000.
Wow.
Now, the upper echelons can also do quite well. Back to our usual source, Transparent California. Recent data from 2018. Here are tonight's nominees. Number 1, lifeguard captain, regular pay, $124,000. OT and other pay, $87,000. Benefits worth $64,000. Total, $277,000.
Man, oh man.
Then there's a section chief, lifeguard section chief, regular pay, $151,000. Other pay, $44,000. Benefits worth $106,000. Total, $302,000.
He made more than his boss.
Well, not quite. There's another captain. No, you're close.
Oh, okay.
Another captain, lifeguard captain.
Oh, captain,
regular
my captain.
Pay, $131,000 in pay, regular pay. And OT and other pay, $145,000. Benefits worth nearly $70,000. Total, $346,000.
Yeah.
Where's my drum roll?
Yeah, drum roll, please.
Drum roll, hey, the drum roll guy out here.
And the winner is...
Number 3, numero tres. Fire captain who made $130,000 in overtime.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, regular pay $130 in overtime.
With the
this is an apartment. This guy's in a management position with a department of 650 seasonal employees, and still racked up $130,000 in overtime.
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
And after this is why you folks need to go to CaliforniaTaxpayersUnion.org or SchoolChoice2020.org. Get signed up and help support our effort here. Please don't tell me that you support tax reform or school choice if you don't actually support it. That means financially. And I want to thank everybody who signed up in the past week. We've gotten a lot of them, especially on school choice. We have to keep it up. And tonight, we spent a lot of time on financial education, trying to tell you what's really going on. The amount of theft that is going on at the public level is astonishing. It is in the hundreds of billions and trillions. And I'm telling you right now, these bear in mind what Juan Tierra here just described to you, with somebody with $346,000 last year. His pension is going to be based upon a big part of that.
Absolutely.
And he's going to be paid $100,000, $150,000, or $200,000 forever.
Forever.
And that money is not there, folks. I've been reading it to you, and we've got a crisis brewing that won't quit. And one of the first things we have to do is restore our citizenship, and we can't have good, intelligent citizens unless they're getting a proper education. That's why the prior issue, the most important issue, the transcendent issue, is school choice, so that we can take our children back and educate them ourselves. And Juan Tierra, I want to thank you as always for a great job.
My pleasure.
And remember here that we can't expect to take back our country unless we first take back the hearts, minds, and souls of our young. Our problems with here in our country have a lot of roots, a lot of sources, but none greater. No event in American history played a greater role in our current crisis than our decision to submit to mandatory schooling and then turning over our children to the government 100 years ago. And we've been going downhill since, now to the point where we are ruled rather than governed, where the people whom we elect and appoint to these offices now tell us what to do. They push us around. They tell us what to think and what to do. Don't let that happen. This is America. More specifically, this is Radio Free Los Angeles, RadioFreeLosAngeles.net. Go to SchoolChoice2020.org. Sign up. Give me some love there. And Josh Jacobs and I will see you a week from now on Radio Free Los Angeles. Mike Alexander, out.